A disabled 20-year-old was driving through a brutal winter blizzard when he pulled over on a lonely highway, never imagining that this one stop would change his life forever. Because hidden inside a frozen van nearby was an elderly woman left behind to die by people who should have protected her. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The snow was falling so thick and heavy that Eli Martinez could barely see the hood of his old Honda Civic, and the world outside looked like it had been erased and replaced with endless white, while violent winter winds slammed into the car and made it shake like it might slide off the road at any moment, forcing Eli to pull over on Route 89 as his chest tightened and his breathing turned sharp and painful. The familiar terror of a panic attack wrapping around him like the freezing air outside, making his heart race so hard it felt like it might burst. Eli was only 20 years old and had lived his entire life with cerebral palsy, a condition that made his left leg weak and difficult to control, forcing him to drag it slightly when he walked, a movement that always reminded him that his body did not work like everyone else's. And on cold winter days like this, the pain felt deeper, heavier, as if the cold itself was pressing into his bones. His mother had begged him not to go to work that morning at the grocery store, warning him that the blizzard was too dangerous and that no job was worth risking his life. But Eli had insisted on going anyway because he was tired of feeling useless, tired of being treated like a problem everyone had to manage, and terrified of losing his job and proving everyone right that he could not take care of himself. Now, sitting alone in the freezing car with weak heat barely blowing from the vents, his hands shaking and breath fogging the windshield, Eli closed his eyes and tried to count slowly like his therapist taught him, fighting the panic while memories of his grandmother filled his mind, especially the way she used to squeeze his hand during winter storms and tell him he was stronger than he believed. A voice that now only existed in his memory because she had died 3 winters ago in a nursing home, alone, after Eli had been too scared and overwhelmed to visit her during her final days, a regret that still weighed on his heart like packed snow on a roof ready to collapse. When he finally wiped the fog from the windshield and opened his eyes again, something dark ahead on the roadside caught his attention. A large van sitting quietly under layers of snow about 50 yards away, with no lights, no engine sound, and no sign of anyone around, looking abandoned and wrong against the endless white landscape. Eli stared at it, feeling his instincts warn him to stay inside his car and wait for help. But something deeper pulled at him, a quiet voice reminding him of all the times he had looked away, all the moments he wished he had been braver. And after a long minute of fighting himself, he zipped his winter jacket up to his chin, pulled his hood tight, took a painful breath of icy air, and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit him instantly, biting his face and hands as the wind nearly knocked him off balance, and the deep snow swallowed his legs up to his knees, turning the short walk into a painful battle as he pushed forward with his good leg and dragged the weak one behind. Each step slow and exhausting, his muscles burning while the wind screamed at his ears and snow stung his eyes. By the time he reached the van, his fingers were numb and his body trembled uncontrollably, and he leaned against the back door just to stay upright, gasping for air before reaching for the handle, surprised when it opened easily, revealing a dark, foul-smelling interior that carried the scent of cold metal, old leather, and something else that made his stomach tighten. Using his phone's flashlight, Eli shined the beam inside and froze when the light landed on an elderly woman sitting on the floor, her thin body slumped against the metal wall, her wrists bound tightly with plastic zip ties secured to a steel bar, her face bruised and swollen with colors that stood out painfully against her pale, frost-bitten skin, and her lips cracked and bluish from a cold. She wore a worn black leather vest covered in patches, including one that read Hell's Angels MC and another stitched with the name Greta. And for a horrifying second, Eli thought she was already dead, until her eyes slowly opened and focused weakly on him as she whispered in a trembling voice that she thought he was someone coming back to finish the job, words that sent a chill through Eli far deeper than the winter air. He knelt beside her despite the pain in his leg, gently telling her that he was there to help, noticing how her body shook from cold and fear, realizing with growing horror that someone had beaten her, tied her up, and left her in this van during a deadly blizzard to freeze to death, a level of cruelty he could barely understand. Greta stared at him as if trying to decide whether he was real or just another cruel trick of her fading consciousness, her eyes slowly scanning his face, his shaking hands, and his uneven posture. And in that moment, Eli felt something inside him shift, a quiet strength rising where fear usually lived, because for once he was not the one needing rescue. And despite his disability, despite the cold, and despite the danger, he knew with absolute certainty that he could not walk away. Not again. Not this time. As the winter storm raged around them, and fate began to turn in a way neither of them could yet imagine. Her breathing was wet and uneven, a deep rattling sound that echoed inside the cold van, and Eli felt his stomach twist because he had heard that sound once before during a long winter night beside his grandmother's hospital bed, right before she passed away, and he knew with terrifying clarity that time was slipping away fast. He swallowed hard and leaned closer to the old woman. "I'm going to help you," he said, though his voice cracked and shook in the freezing air, and his hands trembled as he reached for the thick plastic zip ties cutting into her wrists, the skin beneath them dark red and swollen from her desperate attempts to pull free. He clawed at the plastic with his fingernails, but his fingers were stiff and numb from the cold, and the ties barely moved, panic rising in his chest again as the storm howled outside the van like it was cheering against him. He searched wildly around the van, noticing empty cans rolling on the floor, a dirty blanket shoved into a corner, and a metal toolbox bolted to the wall that refused to open, locked tight, while Greta's voice suddenly grew firmer despite her condition as she warned him that he needed to leave before the men who did this came back to make sure she was dead, coughing hard as blood touched her lips and telling him to save himself. Eli shook his head, memories of standing beside his grandmother's coffin flooding his mind, remembering the promise he made to never let someone die alone again, and quietly telling Greta that he was not leaving. His eyes finally caught a jagged piece of broken metal near the floor, rusted and sharp, and he yanked it free with a screech, wedging it under the zip tie and sawing back and forth until the plastic frayed and snapped, freeing one wrist, then the other, his arms burning with effort as Greta slumped forward and he caught her fragile body, surprised by how light she felt, like winter wind could carry her away. When he asked if she could walk and she tried to stand only to collapse, Eli looked out through the open van doors at the 50 yards of knee-deep snow separating him from his car, his bad leg aching already, knowing it was nearly impossible, yet choosing to try anyway, lifting her arm over his shoulders and bracing himself as they stepped into the storm. The wind hit them brutally, nearly knocking them over, and Eli's weak leg screamed in pain as he forced it to move, step by step, dragging through the snow while Greta mumbled faint words he could not hear, falling once, then again, until halfway to the car her legs failed completely and they crashed into the snow together, Eli lying there gasping, convinced he could not do this, that he was just a disabled kid pretending to be strong, until Greta grabbed his jacket and ordered him to get up. With a rough, angry strength that lit something fierce inside him. Fueled by anger at the men who left her to die, anger at his own body, and anger at a cruel winter world, Eli pushed himself up again and kept going, falling 2 more times before finally reaching the car, barely able to see as he shoved her into the back seat, wrapped her in an emergency blanket and his own jacket, and started the engine with shaking hands, praying it would turn over as the heater blasted weak warmth into the freezing car. He drove blindly through the white storm, whispering for Greta to stay with him, answering her quiet questions about his leg and telling her he was born this way, listening as she spoke about her grandson, her daughter, and the betrayal inside her own motorcycle club during a winter charity ride meant for sick children, her voice fading in and out as her breathing worsened. When lights finally appeared through the snow, glowing like hope against the darkness, Eli pushed the car harder and slid into a truck stop parking lot, laying on the horn and screaming for help until people ran out into the storm, pulling Greta inside while Eli collapsed in the snow, his leg useless beneath him. Inside the warm diner, surrounded by coffee smells and bright lights, Eli told a state trooper everything while Greta clung weakly to his hand and thanked him for saving her life, telling him that most people would have driven past, but he stopped. When the ambulance arrived and took her away, promising she would remember his name, Eli sat alone afterward, feeling empty rather than heroic, unsure if she would survive. Days passed in the deep winter cold, and Eli returned to stocking shelves and quiet nights filled with worry until his mother hugged him tightly after he finally told her everything, pride shining through her tears. On the 4th day, as another snowstorm settled over the town, Eli pulled into his apartment parking lot and instantly felt that something was different, the air heavy and still, as if winter itself was holding its breath. The parking lot was completely packed with motorcycles, not just a few, but hundreds of them, stretching down the street and filling every open space, their metal frames dusted with leftover winter salt and light snow, standing silent yet somehow loud, as if the cold air itself carried the echo of their engines. Eli's hands began to shake the moment he saw them, his breath catching in his chest as he slowly parked his car and stepped out into the sharp winter air, surrounded by men and women in thick leather jackets layered over hoodies and thermal shirts, their breath visible as clouds in the cold, some old with long gray beards and deep lines carved into their faces by years of wind and weather, others young and strong, but all wearing vests marked with Hell's Angels MC patches and different chapter names. Every single one of them turned to look at Eli, and his heart slammed so hard he thought he might faint, fear rushing through him as he wondered if these were the same people who had hurt Greta, if they had come here to finish what they started. And he instinctively took a step back toward his car before the crowd slowly parted and Greta appeared, alive and standing, moving carefully with a cane, her body still wrapped in winter layers and bandages, stitches visible on her face, her arms, healing but her eyes clear and bright. And when she saw Eli, tears spilled freely down her cheeks as she walked straight toward him and took both of his trembling hands in hers. She spoke loudly, her voice steady and full despite everything she had been through, telling everyone present that this was the young man who saved her life. And the sound that followed was overwhelming as the bikers began clapping, the noise rolling like thunder through the cold air, echoing off buildings, mixed with whistles and cheers, some of them wiping tears from their eyes. A massive man with a thick beard and tattooed arms stepped forward, his vest marked with the word President, and introduced himself as Bones, the head of the Northern chapter, explaining that Greta was family to them and that what Eli did during that brutal winter storm, stopping on an empty highway, pulling her from frozen van while barely able to walk himself, showed more courage and heart than most people ever display in a lifetime. Greta squeezed Eli's hands again and told everyone how he had fallen in the snow, how his leg had nearly given out, how she begged him to leave and save himself. But he refused, choosing to stay and fight the cold with her instead. And as she turned to face the crowd, she reminded them that while others stayed warm inside and drove past without stopping, this one young man pulled over and saved her life. The roar that followed felt like a living thing, engines revving and voices shouting approval, the sound vibrating through Eli's chest until tears burned his eyes, emotions he did not fully understand crashing over him. Bones stepped forward again and held out a black leather vest, heavy and worn, explaining that it was an honorary patch, a symbol of family, protection, and respect, promising that if Eli ever needed help or found himself in trouble, they would come without hesitation. And with shaking hands, Eli accepted the vest, feeling the weight of it and the meaning behind it as he looked around at the crowd who now saw him not as weak or broken, but as someone who mattered. He whispered that he did not know what to say, and Greta pulled him into a strong, heartfelt hug, telling him he had already said everything that mattered the moment he stopped his car in that storm. Bones then handed Eli an envelope, telling him it was from all of them, meant for medical bills or anything else he needed, insisting he not refuse because family takes care of family. And when Eli opened it and saw the amount inside, more money than he had ever held, he tried to give it back, insisting he did not do what he did for money, only because it was right. But Greta gently pushed the envelope back toward him and told him that was exactly why he deserved it. One by one, the motorcycles started, engines roaring to life in the cold afternoon, the sound building until it felt like another winter storm, and they pulled away two by two, some riders waving, some saluting, all of them looking at Eli with respect, as if his disability did not lessen him, but made his actions even greater. Greta hugged him one last time before leaving, telling him that while he saved her life, she believed he might have changed his own as well. And as the final motorcycle disappeared down the street, its red tail light fading into the gray winter distance, Eli stood alone in the quiet parking lot holding the vest, thinking about how just days ago he sat in his car shaking from panic attack, convinced he was weak and useless, haunted by the memory of his grandmother and his failure to be there when she needed him most. Now, standing in the cold with snow crunching beneath his feet, he felt something different, like the universe had given him another chance to show up when it mattered. And he slipped the vest on, finding it fit perfectly, walking slowly toward his apartment with his bad leg dragging as always, yet somehow feeling lighter, stronger, like the leg of someone who had walked through a blizzard and refused to quit. Inside his apartment, with winter light fading outside the window, Eli set the envelope on the table and thought about using it to pay bills, help his mother, or finally return to school. But more than the money or the vest, he had gained proof that his heart was stronger than his fear, that even when you are scared, cold, and convinced you cannot go on, choosing to stop and help can change everything. And as the sun set over the frozen town, Eli closed his eyes for the first time in years, without feeling like a burden, feeling instead like someone who mattered, someone who saved a life, and that warmth in his chest stayed long after the winter light disappeared.